Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. In today's class, we will look at approaches section for a predicted paper for the UK AQA Psychology curriculum. If you're pursuing Oxford International AQA Psychology, then also this lesson will be very helpful to you because you can also get similar questions in your paper. I want to give a disclaimer at the beginning only that this is not the final paper, of course. This is a predicted paper. This is a best educated guess on what can come in the paper. Don't take it as these are the only questions you need to do for the paper. Rather, take it as these are the questions that you need to focus more on for the coming paper. Like you can prioritize these questions and these topics. Okay, of course, no one can say what will come in the final paper, but this guess is based on an analysis of past papers. Basically, some questions are asked repetitively, so those topics are considered to be very important from where those questions are coming. They are asked in different forms every year. So, say some of these questions have been coming a lot as longer questions in the past papers. So, we can expect that this time they would come for shorter questions, lesser marks. Also, questions which have hardly appeared since the syllabus is launched. So, they are due for assessment, they haven't been assessed yet. So, those are most likely to come. So, this guest paper is prepared with lot of analysis of what has already come, but I would like to reiterate, not necessary that these are only the questions or these are only the marks for which these topics will come. Take it as a measure of good practice for the paper. Also, in my other videos, I have written like complete answers for questions. So if you need to know like exactly how to write word to word, please visit those videos, because in today's video, I'm going to take a different approach. I'm just going to be jotting down the points that could answer these questions. So organization, how to approach the question, content, everything I will be covering. It's just that it becomes very time consuming to write the entire answer. So that is something I won't be doing in today's video. But I can assure you, in the past videos, I have written even 16 markers with scenarios, without scenarios. So even if you need help for longer answers like essays, even that is available on my channel. Okay, so let's begin with this paper. In today's video, I'm covering only approaches section. In the coming videos, I will cover other sections from paper 2 and paper 3. Okay, let's look at the first question. They've asked, briefly explain Wundt's role in the emergence of psychology as a science. Okay, first, how you should approach this question. I'll just explain that to you. For these type of questions, always look at the marks which are allotted. Because I know you must have learned a lot about Wundt's contribution to psychology, but the question is worth only 4 marks. So you need to restrict your answer to what is worth only 4 marks. I would suggest either you take one of his contributions and really elaborate on it for 4 points to cover 4 marks, or alternatively take 2 of his contributions and give 2 points on each to justify 4 marks. What else you need to notice about the question is the command term, which is briefly explained. This means that the question is purely AO1 or descriptive, worth 4 marks. There is no AO2 application component in this. We can see no situation is provided, and no AO3. No strengths and weaknesses are to be given for this. Also, when it comes to Wundt, students like frequently make this mistake of trying to link his contributions to present day approaches. So, say for example, how he has inspired the field of cognitive psychology, or how he caused opposition from behaviorists. That is not what the question is asking you for here. So, if you just read the question carefully, it's only about his role in emergence of psychology, nothing more than that. So, in the beginning, when psychology was coming in, what did he do that contributed to the field at that time? That is what they want to know. So, don't add any unnecessary points. That is what I can advise for how to approach the question. Now, let's just jot down a few points, brainstorming, and then I'll write a few pointers on how to answer the question. So when it comes to Wundt's contribution to emergence, one thing which comes to my mind is setting up of the first laboratory. I'm sure that's coming to your mind also. Another thing is his method of introspection. He devised a new method of looking into the mind, which was the chief focus of psychology at that time. And experimentation, the scientific method. These are his contributions that we have learned about. I would take the approach of taking any two of these and giving 2 points on each. So I would like to speak about the laboratory which he has established and the introspection method. You could choose something else out of these three, maybe one of these that you want to elaborate on for 4 marks. So 4 points, you have some details to share, you could give it that way. Okay, so take this as a sample outline of what you can write. Okay, so first would be establishment of the laboratory, of the first laboratory of psychology. To elaborate a little more on this, where and when this laboratory was established, in University of Leipzig, Germany. I hope you've memorized this. You know it is important to remember these facts. And to emphasize further, like before this, there would not be any laboratories which are exclusively dedicated to psychology. Psychological, if any studies used to be done, they used to be done in other laboratories only, like the biology or neurology laboratory. So it was exclusively a psychology laboratory. So these are my first 2 points. Each can earn me 1 mark. Okay, of course, when I'm writing, I have to write in a proper paragraph format. As I told you earlier, I just want to remind you, the only reason I'm writing this way is to save time. So if you want to see how to properly answer a 4 marker in a paragraph, you can visit my other videos. Okay, my second point would be devising the method of introspection to study the mind. Again, any detail or example I can give to elaborate further on this point. So, as an example, I could say that it would involve giving someone a stimulus, like say placing a rock on their hand and asking them to report any thoughts, sensations, feelings, imagery that is coming to their mind. For elaboration, I would like to give a detail right now. It was a way of looking at uh, feelings, images, and sensations in the mind in a structured or standardized way. So that's it. I know there's a lot to write about. Like, very commonly, what I've been coming across with my students recently is that they just have too much to write about, they don't know where to stop. So that approach is not helpful, because if you take too much time answering a 4 marker, how will you get enough time to answer the remaining questions? So no doubt you must be knowing a lot, but restrict to yourself to how much is justified for 4 marks. Also, this reminds me, I will just upload this answer sheet which I'm preparing here, like this rough answer sheet, on my website, and I'll link it in the description box and pin comment below. So in case you want a copy of the outlines for future reference, you can download it from there for free in PDF format. Okay, let's look at the next question. Cognitive psychology question, research methods, ethics, can be linked to any approach or any topic and asked in the paper. So this is from research methods. Let's read the scenario first. A cognitive psychologist carried out an experiment into the effects of other people on problem solving. An independent group's design was used. In condition A, 15 children were given 30 problems, each to solve in 2 hours. The children completed the task in the same room and were allowed to talk to each other. In condition B, a different group of 15 children were given the same problems and in the same time to solve, but worked in silence. The number of problems solved in condition A was 204. The number of problems solved in condition B was 324. Calculate the mean number of problems solved in condition A and condition B. I think this has got cut off a little. I'll just add that. Okay, so This question is like very straightforward, calculating the mean. In fact, you don't even need to add up anything here. Like they haven't given raw data for you to add and then calculate the mean. So it's one of the simpler questions that can come. It's just that where students lose marks is in a haste. They just pick up the calculator, calculate on that, and write the final answer. You have marks for working or for steps also. In this case, the steps, of course, is not adding the raw data because that isn't provided. But at least you have to show what comes in the numerator, what comes in the denominator, what is being divided by what. You need to show that. Then only you will get full marks. 1 mark for showing your working and 1 mark for coming to the correct final answer. I know calculating the final answer is no big deal over here, but that is where you lose marks in not showing the working. Okay, so first they've asked calculate the mean number of problems solved in each condition. Okay, so just to remember now the formula for the mean for those students who are not able to bring to mind. Also, one more thing, as silly as it might sound, students do it. They calculate the median or mode instead of the mean. Again, that is because of haste or nervousness. They don't read the question carefully. So I just want to caution you or bring your attention to that fact that that mistake is possible, calculating something else instead of the mean. So just be careful that you don't do that. Okay, in condition A, the number of problems solved is 204. And in condition B, number of problems solved is 324. Now, the formula of the mean is you have to take a total and divide it by the number of items. In this case, number of children. Right? Because we want to know on an average how much each child has solved. So, in our case, the total is going to be number of problems solved. And that we are going to have to divide by the number of children. In words, giving the formula is not compulsory, although you can give it for good measure, but at least showing the number which gets substituted in the numerator of this written formula and what comes in the denominator. That is very important. So I'll just do both. If you want what I'm writing in words, you can skip that. Okay, so for condition A, it's going to be total number of problems solved, which is 204 divided by number of children in condition A, which I can see. I'm sure you can also see here. It is 15. Okay, as I said, this is optional if you want to show it, but definitely show this part 204 divided by 15. Like show this is the formula that you're using to work out the mean. Okay, I'm doing it on the calculator quickly. So I'll do 204 on the calculator. I've just pressed that, pressing the division button and then pressing 15. It's coming to 13.6. In the paper, they give you that slot where you can write the final answer. I'm not having that slot right now, so I just highlight this. Okay, same way they want me to count for condition B. It's going to be in the same way only. It's just that I have to take condition B value over here. So in condition B, the total number of problems solved is 324. And the total number of children is again 15. So this time it's going to be 324 divided by 15. Again, same thing on the calculator. First I will enter 324. I'll press the division button and then I press 15. That's 21.6. Okay, so how you get scored for this one is 1 mark for showing the working and the calculation of condition A. Working and final answer of condition A, and 1 mark for showing working and final answer for condition B. Let's look at next part of this question. Explain one conclusion that can be drawn from mean number of problems solved in condition A and B. This question is actually very simple, but students mostly answer this wrong from what I have seen in my classes. They don't understand the difference between conclusion and result. So I can't emphasize on that enough. Result is the numerical data or data in words that has been obtained in a particular study. So in this case, if I say that for condition A, the mean was smaller, it was 13.6 as compared to the mean for condition B, which was greater, 21.6. That's not a conclusion, that's a result from the study. Even if I specify that, after specifying it, I will have to give a conclusion. So either I can give the conclusion directly without reference to the result, that's fine because they just want conclusion. Or alternatively, if that's what I'm comfortable with, I can first give a sentence on the result and the next sentence can be the conclusion. But conclusion has to be there. By itself, just stating what are the means, which one is greater than the other is going to give you 0 marks. That is not credit worthy at all. Okay, so coming to what are we understanding from the means? That is what you need to ask yourself when it comes to a question, conclusion question. What is the larger topic being assessed here? Let's come back to the question. The larger topic being assessed is effects of other people on problem solving. So now the result that is there in front of me, meaning the means that are there, what are they telling me about this larger question that is there in front of us? What is it helping me to understand about the effects of other people on problem solving? That is what I need to ask myself when it comes to a conclusion. So looking at the means, the fact that in condition B the mean is greater, I should just take a look again at what was different for condition B compared to condition A. The difference was that in condition B, the children got to solve the problem in silence. Right? And in condition A, they had to do it when they were talking to each other. So if the mean is higher in condition B, indicating their performance is better than that of condition A, that means somehow, what am I understanding? If people are given the opportunity to work in silence, that helps them work better or that helps them solve problems better. But when they are made to talk to each other, that distracts them or that takes away from their problem solving ability. This is what I need to explain in a conclusion. What inference can be drawn? That talking to others can be distracting, it can reduce the ability to solve problems or the ability to solve enough problems in an allotted time compared to working in silence. So that is the conclusion. I directly prefer to write the conclusion. Your choice might be to first give the result. You can put it that way. First, you can restate the results and then give the conclusion. So, my points for this would be solving problems in silence facilitates greater and faster problem solving. This can justify 1 mark, whereas solving problems while talking proves to be distracting and slows down problem solving. So that justifies 2 marks. Also, one more thing this reminds me is many times in the paper you asked to compare two things, two conditions when it comes to research methods questions, like show difference between two things, or even if they don't tell you directly, like show the difference between two things, but they've explained two conditions in a question. So always have a holistic approach, always include both when you're discussing something. So when it comes to the conclusion, many people will just leave it at point one. Like they will just leave it with silence helps problem solving. But holistic approach means you talk about the other condition also. After all, there was a control condition with which a comparison was being drawn. Even the performance of that condition was being assessed. So definitely then you need to talk about both of them. So always do that. Sometimes there are questions like beyond research methods also. For shorter, only 2 or 4 marks, compare this approach with that, compare the proposition of this theory with that one. Make sure to include both in your answer. Like this one, supposing is better for this reason, and that one is not as good for this reason. So always show that comparison in your answer. Same thing needs to be done here. So how I get the marks for this one, I think it's obvious, but I'll just show quickly. The first point gets first mark, talking about condition B, the inference drawn from that. Second point gets 1 mark, inference drawn from condition A. Okay, now finally we have the, I can say maybe most dreaded question, because most students, when it comes to approaches, first thing they'll tell me is comparison of approaches. We are concerned about comparison of approaches. What has happened is, in the past papers, like this syllabus was introduced in 2017. Since then, psychodynamic approach has not been assessed at all. So we do expect a big question to come from them. Like at most, it has come for the shorter questions. So this time the 16 marker can be from psychodynamic. It can be entirely from psychodynamic, like not even comparing with any other approach, just outlining and evaluating the approach, or it could be asked in comparison with any other approach. So literally any other, like cognitive, humanistic, or in this case biological. Biological is important, it comes very repeatedly. So perhaps they can make a combination out of psychodynamic, which hasn't been asked yet, and biological, which is important because it is asked frequently. So this question, when we practice, we are able to revise both the important approaches. How to answer 16 markers with scenarios, that is with AO2. How to answer 16 markers without scenarios, just AO1 and AO3. Both I have covered with writing complete answers, providing you the model answers on my channel. So you can definitely visit those videos if you want to see in details. Okay, let's look at this question very carefully. Outline and discuss psychodynamic approach. That means outline psychodynamic approach. They want AO1 from it. Discuss psychodynamic approach. They also want AO3 from it. Meaning for psychodynamic approach, they want both. Refer to psychosexual stages in your answer. Out of so much that Freud has given, defense mechanisms, levels of consciousness, personality theory, psychosexual stages, and psychotherapy, the most emphasis they want is on psychosexual stages. By itself, it's a big theory. So definitely we have to cover these. There are 5 psychosexual stages in detail. Okay, make sure don't skip anything from there because they've particularly pointed that out in the question. Discuss both psychodynamic and biological approach. Include a comparison of the approaches in your discussion. For psychodynamic, anyways we have noted we have to give AO3. For biological also we have to give AO3. Have they asked us to outline the biological approach? No. So AO1 does not have to be given from the biological approach. This is where students make the most common mistake. They include AO1 for both. That's why it is very important to take the time to read the question carefully and not to be in a rush. Especially this type of question looks lengthy because they are conveying to you a lot about what they expect. So only if you read carefully you will know exactly how to structure your answer. So make sure for biological you give only AO3. Discuss is the AO3 command term, and that is what is asked for biological. Now the next part also, it is up to interpretation. Include a comparison of approaches. There are 2 ways of looking at this. You know, anyways, for a standard 16 marker, like this is a standard 16 marker with AO1 6 and AO3 10. You have to give good terminology and all for AO1. For AO3, you give 4 evaluation points. 3 if you are having a detailed approach. In most cases, students don't have a very detailed approach, so 4 is recommended. Now, when they say include a comparison of the approaches, actually they don't mean that all of your points have to be a comparison. That's why they are saying include. But in case you choose to take all the points also as comparison only, there's no harm in that because comparison by itself is an evaluation. So what can be your approach here is one, all 4 points you can make it about comparison, which is easy also. Because if you've learned one or two comparison features, then you'd know all of them. Otherwise, mostly you won't know any. So if you've studied properly, I don't think writing 4 comparison points is a big deal. Alternatively, your approach can be at least take 2 points of comparison, and then if you want to give some general points, say about psychodynamic approach only for evaluation or biological approach only for evaluation, your remaining 2 points can be those, like only about one of the approaches, non-comparison. I prefer the first one. It isn't compulsory, like you can see, but for a comparison question, I like to give all my 4 points on comparison. Okay, so let's see how to answer this one. For AO1, I'm writing in pointers only, but I'll try to make it as detailed as I can for you. In the sense, and please listen to what I'm saying as I'm outlining, that will give you a lot of clue into what to write. You have to focus mainly on psychosexual stages, but it's an essay. It makes for a good essay if you introduce a little psychodynamic approach, not generally what our approach is. So, a little you talk about it before getting into the stages and really elaborating on them. Okay, so when it comes to psychodynamic approach, of course, firstly we must name the founder, Freud. So you could begin with Freud founded the psychodynamic school of thought in psychology. Then you can give a line about his contributions. You don't need to elaborate all, but you can say that he gave a comprehensive theory of personality, including, in one line only, putting commas, you can just name levels of consciousness, tripartite structure of personality, psychosexual stages, defense mechanisms, and therapy, etc. Now you can totally focus on psychosexual stages, meaning that you don't need to elaborate on any of the other concepts, you don't even need to define them. It's just for a good introduction that I have just mentioned everything just to show that what the school is all about. That's it. When they say refer to psychosexual stages, of course, they don't mean that AO1 has to be entirely of psychosexual stages. You can get credit even for talking a little about any of these levels of consciousness and all. But personally, I feel because there is so much to elaborate on the psychosexual stages only, I'll really run out of time and space if I'm going to talk about everything. So I'm just going to write about psychosexual stages. Definitely, in the mark scheme, they would suggest something like if the psychosexual stages are not referred to, maximum supposing the student can get 1 or 2 marks. But if the psychosexual stages are referred to and only the psychosexual stages, nothing else is elaborated upon, then you can score full 6 marks. What is there when it comes to Freudian theory? It's very, very huge. There's just too much. So definitely we can expect that in an essay they are going to point out exactly what they want from that theory. It's too much to expect students to write everything from that theory. So they are going to pick one of the things like they've picked and asked to emphasize on that. That's why one more thing which I remember just now, many students ask me, can't I just learn the whole thing in brief, like the whole psychodynamic theory? Just learn a little about everything and, focus more on the one I am comfortable with. That is not possible. You can't take a subjective approach to it because in the paper they do emphasize like this. And it's not only in the psychodynamic theory. When it comes to, say, the cognitive approach, also, they have asked questions like refer to schema theory in your answer. So they always pick up one aspect of the approach and ask you to mainly focus on that. So you have to know every aspect that is given under the approaches. So make sure you're referring to a quality textbook or the syllabus content directly, the specification content, so that you know exactly what you have to cover, which subtopics are there under the approaches, and you don't miss on any of them. You should know all of them. Coming to psychosexual stages, to score full marks in that, you have to give very specific details, such as the age range in which these stages occur. You have to memorize and write what is the erogenous zone in each stage, and what is the like primary conflict or primary resolution of conflict that is taking place in that stage. So just give it in a very structured manner to make sure that you're covering everything, and give good terminology in the sense of naming things like erogenous zone, castration, anxiety, identification, whatever becomes important. Just keep on naming that to get full marks. Okay, what my transition would be, I had just introduced the theory. Then I would say psychosexual stages theory is very important, and it has brought about 5 stages in the development of a child, and those are as follows. So first is the oral stage, which occurs from 0 to 2 years. Yes, you have to memorize and write the age to get full marks. For psychosexual development, that's very important. It's key. Okay, the erogenous zone in this case, to mention erogenous zone means the focus of pleasure in that period is the mouth. How it is engaged is by the child biting, sucking, etc. That is what the child is interested in. If there is fixation at this stage, it can result in an uh, like oral aggressive personality or an orally passive personality. It's okay. That much detail you might have not learned. That much is not required in the specification. But you can say something general also, like fixation can result in oral problems or mouth related psychological issues, behavioral issues in adulthood. Then we have the anal stage. Anal stage occurs between 2 and 3 years. The age ranges can be slightly different depending on which reference you are using. That is always the case with Freud's theory. That's okay. Roughly about it should be the age range which I am giving. Here, the erogenous zone is the anus. The main concern here is toilet training. The child needs to learn to use the toilet at this time. If that is not done successfully, it can result in fixation, meaning that the child can have an anally retentive or expulsive personality. Again, if you haven't learned in that much details, that's fine. But it can result in issues of stubbornness, perfectionism, withholding, or so we can say perfectionism or indiscipline in adulthood. Then we have after this the phallic stage. The phallic stage lasts between 3 to 6 years. Here the erogenous zone are the genitalia. This is very important from the standpoint of Oedipus complex. Most of you must have reviewed the study of little hands as well. So definitely make a mention of Oedipus complex, castration anxiety, and identification. Even penis envy, if you remember that. You don't have to cover each and every concept here. It can become very lengthy, but at a minimum, do talk about Oedipus complex and identification. Those are important. So just to remind you, orally I will speak it out. I don't want to write that much. Oedipus complex is when a child becomes attracted to the parent of the opposite sex, that results in rivalry with the same sex parent, and eventually there's identification with the same sex parent once the conflict is like resolved, and that results in healthy development of personality, else there will be fixation. Castration anxiety can occur at this stage. You must be remembering from the case of little hands. This is when a male child fears that his penis will be cut off by the father in response to his attraction feelings towards the mother. So that fear is called castration anxiety. Identification, as we've seen previously, just means adopting the behaviors of the same sex parent to have healthy sexual development, in the sense of healthy gender development rather, in adulthood. And penis envy is when the girl comes to accept anatomically that she does not have a penis and so she feels lesser. She has an inferiority complex in comparison to males. Now, one thing that is here is that many students just stray a little because there's too much here, so they get into evaluation in the sense of gender bias, and then what Gilligan had to say about penis envy, and how Freud was androcentric. Those things become evaluative. They become AO3. That becomes a judgment of whether the theory is accurate or not. If at all you want to discuss those things, you can give them in AO3. As I mentioned, you can give some selective AO3 points there of only one of the approaches, but don't include them in AO1. Okay, so if fixation occurs at this stage, it can result in poor gender development. Again, it has been linked to things like homosexuality and all, but again, you could just give generally poor gender development of the child, or not appropriate gender behaviors in adulthood. Then coming to latent stage or latency stage, it's called either, in some textbooks, it's called latency, in some latent. Either term is correct. It occurs between 6 to 12 years. Here, there's no erogenous zone because this is the time where the child is away from pleasure and more interested in asexual activities, social activities. Fixation is very rare at this stage. If at all it occurs, it means there is lack of sexual development in adulthood, or lack of sexual preferences in adulthood. But primarily, we can just say that no particular fixation is very rare at this stage. So, children just keep on playing with their same sex peers in this stage. So, fixation is rare. Okay, finally, we have the genital stage. This is from 12 years until death. Like, this is the last stage according to Freud. There is erogenous zone in the sense it is the genitals again, but many times we don't even refer to them as erogenous zone because now they are no longer just about pleasure. They are about healthy sexual development, actual attraction towards opposite sex for long term heterosexual relationships. It marks the beginning of adult life, and there's nothing much to say about this because, as I mentioned, this is the healthy development stage, so there's no fixation as such which takes place at this stage because it continues for the full adulthood of the person. So this is what needs to be covered in AO1. As I had mentioned in the beginning, only psychosexual stages are very lengthy by themselves. So I don't think there is need to give anything else about the theory when that is worth little credit. Best approach is just to focus on psychosexual stages. Now coming to the AO3 part, this is where we can really like compare the two approaches. Here we bring in the biological approach. What will be my four evaluative points? And of course, regardless of what type of question it is, I must follow the Peel format in writing. Again, I won't give too much general discussion of what is the Peel format. If you want to see that, it's there in my previous videos. I just stay focused for this particular answer, how we can use the Peel structure. Okay, my first comparison point, and I think which would strike to most of you, is nature versus nurture. Also, before I write this, let's quickly like brainstorm and bring to mind which are the possible parameters on which we usually compare approaches. There can be more than what I'm giving here. Maybe this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the typical things. One is view of behavior. I'm sure most of you have a table with you. You might have downloaded it or prepared it on your own where you have all the approaches written and feature by feature there's comparison. So most of you would be having the first point as view of behavior. Then it will be nature versus nurture. Means all the debates basically. Free will, determinism, reductionism, holism. Scientific view. So how scientific are these approaches? That is one more parameter for comparison. Also, gender culture bias. Again, that comes from issues and debates. And then views of abnormality. and psychotherapy. Like that also comes under this. Maybe you have more points also. Yeah, idiographic and nomothetic, one more debate. Maybe you have more points than this also. These might not be the only ones, but generally these are the ones on which we compare. So many times when students tell me they don't understand for a comparison question what to compare on, what can be the evaluator points. Actually, there are so many. You just have to be well versed with your approaches. Okay, I would like to take nature versus nurture. I'm sure that is the first thing coming to mind to most of you. Also, when they say compare approaches, they don't mean that you have to really give a contrast or differences. That is also one misinterpretation. Comparison means both similarities and differences. So it could well be that you give a similarity, what is the same in both approaches. So as far as nature versus nurture is concerned, that is my point in the peel format. Both are primarily supporting nature. So that's a similarity that I want to bring about. Sorry, this will also come in the point itself. So I could put the point as like when I'm writing, the beginning of my first year 3 point can only be both psychodynamic and biological approach primarily support nature in the nature versus nurture debate. To expand on this or to elaborate in the peel format, how each one supports nature more than nurture. I just need to explain that. When it comes to the psychodynamic approach, the biggest emphasis is on instincts, drives, unconscious motivation. Freud said that every human being is born with aggressive and sexual impulses. Born with, meaning he's supporting nature. An example of this could be that the id is very dominant and the id keeps urging people to engage in aggressive sexual behaviors. If you want to give an even more specific example, you could give something like the id keeps asking people for revenge if they have been wronged by someone else, or asked to behave like promiscuous instead of being committed to relationships. You can give a specific example like that. So that's how it supports nature. And biological, how it primarily supports nature is because it explains all behavior in terms of genetics, evolution, hormones, neurotransmitters, brain structures. Again, you could give a very specific example, like let's say ventricle enlargement is the brain structure that results in schizophrenia. Or you could give a general example that all psychological abnormalities are attributed to malfunctioning of neurotransmitters. Here also you could give a specific example if you wish to, like dopamine malfunctioning results in schizophrenia, or serotonin malfunctioning results in depression and bipolar, that way. So that is the explanation, the elaboration. Now coming to the explanation in the PDF format, both the approaches also to some extent support nurture. It's not like they entirely support nature. So for my analysis, the second E, I would just like to talk a little about that. When it comes to psychodynamic, a secondary role is given to nurture also. So nurture contributes to fulfillment or lack of fulfillment of instincts. For example, just like the id keeps on urging for sexual and aggressive behaviors, the ego, which is developed through learning in society, similarly the superego, which develops through moral learning in society, they keep on checking the id. They keep on, like superego keeps on opposing the id, or the ego keeps on suppressing it. So that can be the example here. So ego, which is developed through social learning, regulates the id. For biological, Nurture contributes to expression of genes or regulates, interacts with brain structures, hormones, etc. to manifest behavior, right? Even the biological approach acknowledges that genes by themselves do not result in behavior. Diathesis stress model, they have to interact with stressors. Or neurotransmitters are the enablers of behavior, but the causes can be sociocultural or psychological in nature. So one example can be the diathesis stress model, which suggests that both biology and environmental factors will contribute to behavior. You can give a more specific example. Let's say in the case of schizophrenia, the biological aspect can be inheritance of COMT gene or DIC1 gene, and the nurture aspect could be expressed emotion or double binding in the family. That is acknowledged. But primary emphasis in both cases, that I'll put in the link, is on nature. So all theory, explanations, exploration has been towards that way. They do suggest that ego plays a role, for example in psychodynamic, or environment plays a role, diathesis stress model, but they don't really research upon it. They restrict their research and explanations to nature, so they just acknowledge the other side and leave it out. So that is similar to both the approaches. This would be my first AO3 point. It is very understandable that when you're writing, your points might not be exactly like mine. Your elaboration might be a little different from mine. Your examples could be different. The intention is to give you an idea of how to think and how to write. I hope that is coming across. Another I would like to take as a contrast point, the differences between the two is idiographic versus nomothetic. That's again a simple one. Psychodynamic uses idiographic approach, and biological uses nomothetic approach. To elaborate on this, why I'm saying that, Freud mainly was the founder and like the chief executor of the theory. He just did case studies. Most of the knowledge which we have are based on his case studies, and case studies, we know, they focus on the uniqueness of one individual. Their in-depth approach is qualitative. So definitely he has adopted an idiographic approach. So for example, you could give the little hands case or the rat man case, whichever you've learned. Like you must have learned about, say, little hands. You don't need to elaborate on the full case, of course, just a line or two. That Freud studied the Oedipus complex through cases like little hands, in which the boy had a fear of horses. Ultimately, it was resolved through identification. You could just give that much. So that's how he took an idiographic approach. Whereas biological approach has typically used experimentation, that too brain scanning methods. Again, I would like to give a specific example like the Maguire study, a natural experiment between taxi drivers and non-taxi drivers to show through MRI scanning that taxi drivers had a better developed posterior hippocampus. So that is the elaboration of how biological uses a nomothetic approach. As we know, experimentation involves generating general laws. Like in Maguire case, generating the law that navigational skills for everybody are located in the posterior hippocampus and that it is plastic. That they were able to arrive at because they used a large sample and they took quantitative methods. So that's why they've supported a nomothetic approach. To elaborate further on this, like to just do a little bit of analysis, I would say that in that sense, Freud's approach, or sorry, psychodynamic approach, has been more like detailed, qualitative, more insightful into behavior, like exactly why behavior occurs. It is explained in depth, but it has also been taken as unscientific. So it has also achieved a like philosophical status, or you can say unscientific status. since it is not backed by empirical evidence. In comparison with this, biological approach has aligned with the principles of science. After all, it's comparison, right? So in the explanation, like, it should not look like standalone points. It should not look like separately you are talking about psychodynamic and biological. Some reconciliation needs to be there. What contrast are you showing in the two? So that is something you can give in the explanation part. So finally, to link this, we can say, therefore, psychodynamic approach has been more detailed and less scientific than the, like, just a one line summary of what we wrote before, then biological. I've said this before also, you might find my points more detailed. That's okay. When we practice, like as a teacher, when I'm giving you a practice, of course, I will be more detailed. When you're writing, in effect, it won't come up to that much. So don't worry about the length. Also, if you feel you are able to write as much as me, you're able to elaborate as much. As I mentioned earlier, you can give only 3 evaluation points also. If you feel that 4 will become too much, that's fine. Another point of comparison I would like to take, another popular one, is scientific, unscientific. I've already overlapped with idiographic. I won't take that again. I would take it as the view of abnormality. This is again a contrast point. There's difference in the approaches when it comes to this. So when it comes to the psychodynamic approach, abnormality is assumed to emerge from fixation to various psychosexual stages. To give a specific example, I would say OCD is said to emerge from fixation to the anal stage. So, in that stage, when a child withholds feces and becomes very stubborn, then that culminates into perfectionist tendencies into adulthood. So, mainly it has to do with childhood experiences. Whereas, when it comes to the biological approach, abnormality is presumed to be because of malfunctioning of the nervous system or the endocrine system, mainly nervous. And it's not about childhood experiences. It could be that the malfunctioning is culminating over the years, but it's about current malfunctioning. As much as contrast that you can draw between two, as much as the difference you can show, the better quality your point is. So, for example, the same OCD would be also give the same example, like OCD for that, OCD for this. This shows like a clear distinction between the two. So if psychodynamic says OCD is fixation to the anal stage, biological says OCD is because of malfunctioning of the neurotransmitter serotonin presently in the brain. Okay, there are contrasting views. Is serotonin more or less? So I'm not saying that, I'm just saying it's fluctuating. So now coming to explanation wise, to draw direct comparison, when it comes to abnormality for psychodynamic approach, it's more something that manifests because of childhood experiences, like we saw, it's attributed to the past and to experiences. Whereas when it comes to biological, it's attributed to the present neural correlates of behavior. So again, stark contrast is there between the two. So finally, link wise, what we can say is psychodynamics view of abnormality is more, it's like more detailed and interpretive, whereas for biological it is more objective and direct, we can say, like more precise. One last comparison point, you could stop at this point if you feel it's become detailed enough. Alternatively, one more point, because generally 4 points are for good measure. I would like to take free will and determinism, both the approaches are deterministic. So this is going to be a similarity point. Psychodynamic makes for psychic determinism, and biological makes for biological determinism. Two different types of determinism, but both are deterministic. So, in elaboration, I can just explain these terms. Psychic determinism means that determinism by itself means behavior is beyond the control of the individual. So, here behavior is emerging from unconscious instincts, drives, and all. That is why it is beyond the control of the individual. A simple example could be the Oedipus complex. You could link it again to the case of Hans. It has truly emerged in the psychosexual stage of the phallic stage, like that 3 to 5 years. It's beyond the control of the individual. At that stage there is going to be conflict, and then further how that conflict is resolved through healthy identification or not, that is going to determine the adult personality. So that's psychic determinism. Biological is uh, behavior is being controlled by genes and all, which we saw before, genes, neurochemistry. So again, it's beyond the control of the individual if they've inherited certain genes, or because if their neurotransmitters are malfunctioning in a certain way, they have to really develop certain abnormalities. Conversely, if they have some special abilities in their genes, like a high IQ, I could give that example, then they are bound to have a high IQ because it is written in their genes. So it's going to be very easy for them. Of course, not necessary that they will achieve their maximum potential, but very easy to achieve that maximum potential. So, being a high IQ individual is determined by their genes. So, in the further explanation, what I can say is therefore, both suggest that behavior is beyond the control of the individual, though for different reasons, and both don't leave room for free will. Both don't believe that it is within the control of the individual to decide how to behave. So, we can say both uh, totally neglect, in fact, the role of free will. Because if you see, when this is one point where students really confuse, so make sure you have conceptual clarity. If you see the psychodynamic approach, when they say that the ego can develop or superego can develop through the environment, that's not free will. Many students take it as free will. It is again one type of determinism only. The environment is determining what is not already determined by unconscious. Same way for biological, when they do agree in diathesis, stress that genes interact with environment. Again, environment is not within the control of the individual. So that is also deterministic. They are fully deterministic. They do not side with free will at all. So both are like, we can say, hard deterministic approaches. And in conclusion, we can say, therefore, that is the commonality between them, that both believe that behaviors are destined, or both believe that behaviors are because of fate. Okay, now these were my 4 comparison points, just for a good measure, in case like you've learned some other points better and you want to know about them. Very quick discussion of those points that I haven't covered. What I have covered for determinism, that would come under view of behavior also, so I'm not discussing that, that overlaps. If you want to take reductionism versus holism, both are reductionist. Psychodynamic focuses only on the role of unconscious instincts, drives, and family dynamics when it comes to behavior. It ignores a lot of things. You could interchangeably suggest that they ignore each other only, they mutually exclude each other. So, for example, psychodynamic does not account for biological factors like genes, hormones, how they contribute to behavior. Likewise, biological just focuses on genetics, it does not account for how unconscious instincts, drives, contribute to behavior. And you can give other possibilities also, like both ignore cognitive thinking, perceptions, belief schemas. So both are very reductionist, both are highly reductionist. Scientific approach I'd already taken. If you take gender culture bias, biological is definitely less biased than psychodynamic. Psychodynamic is very biased because Freud's views on women, particularly gender bias, he believed women have an inferior status to men. He morally derogated their stands in society. So he was very strong on this. Whereas biological approaches are not concerned with evaluation. They don't. make any judgments. It's a very non-judgmental approach. It's very objective. So no doubt even they bring about gender differences, like say there is hemispheric specialization, but they're very factually based and they don't evaluate which gender is better than the other. They just point out gender differences that are there. So it's a very unbiased approach compared to the Freudian approach. Culture bias wise, Freud's approach again is the biased one. It's mainly based on the Vienna culture, medieval culture, Western culture, nothing to do with modern society or non Western cultures. Very biased approach. Biological has no cultural bias, again, it's universal. Undoubtedly, genes can differ from culture to culture, but again, it doesn't account for bias. They are not judgmental in trying to compare cultures or prove the superiority of one culture. They might just objectively find some culture differences. So, similar to what is the case with gender bias. Okay, rest I have covered. So, those could also be some of the points that you want to take. So, this is the predicted paper for approaches, paper 2. I hope this lesson is helpful to you. I do take classes for psychology, private tuition. So, if you're interested in the same, you could contact me. I'm leaving my contact number and email ID in the description box and pinned comment below. Please do not contact me personally for any comments you have about this video, such as any doubts about this particular video or any suggestions what you want to see in the next video. Please leave those in the comment box. I will answer your questions on the correct channels. Okay, and do keep practicing well. Exams are approaching soon, so I hope you're prepared for them. And all the best for your paper. I will try my very best to cover similar predicted papers for the other subtopics and for paper 3. Okay, see you soon then. Goodbye.